Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining myself, Sophie Parrott, a journalist at HR Grapevine, today for an HR Grapevine and Clear Review webinar titled Riding Out the Turnover Tsunami, How Can Modern Performance Management Support Retention? And for this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by Nick Gallimore, the Director of Talent Transformation and Insight at Clear Review for today's webinar. Some of you may have noticed, if you've attended webinars in the past, that this webinar has a slightly different look and feel. And this is one of the first webinars that we are running using our specially built platform. For today, you should see a question and poll widget on the right-hand side of your screen where you'll be able to ask questions and put forward questions to Nick at the end of the session. Any of the questions that don't get answered, don't worry, they'll be passed over to Clear Review afterwards so that they can follow up. Please also take part in our polls during the session. You'll be able to see a poll which is live on the right-hand side of your screen at the moment. And if you do have any feedback, please do get in touch via the email, which will be posted into the Q&A chat now. But without any further ado, I'd like to hand over directly to Nick to discuss the topic further.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you for the very warm welcome and a very warm welcome to you all. And thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to spend some time with us today. As always, it's an absolute pleasure to be working with the team at HR Grapevine. My name is Nick Gallimore. I am, as Sophie said, Director of Talent Transformation and Insight here at Clear Review. By way of a bit of background, I've spent pretty much my entire career working in the talent management space, particularly in the kind of transformative part of the talent management life cycle, helping different kind of organizations either hire the best people, develop people in the best way, and indeed get the very best from their people. My role within Clear Review is to do exactly that. It's to support our customers predominantly in the adoption of best practice continuous performance management, which has been a really interesting part of the industry to be involved in over the past few years. And I have to say, today's topic is an interesting one, and it's been a while since I think retention was top of the kind of HR strategy, things to keep us awake about list, but here we are. It's reared its head, or is rearing its head right now. And if you feel anything like me, and bearing in mind, I talk to a lot of people in the space every day, it does feel a little bit like we're entering yet again, I've got to say, into some new and scary waters. And there's this strange kind of perfect storm happening right now. And I'll say some words here. And as I've thought about this morning, these don't sound like words that I was expecting to put together perhaps a couple of years ago. But we've got right now happening the removal of furlough. We've got Brexit. We've got resurgent job market. We've got changing talent demands. We've got staff shortages happening at the moment, and it's certainly making for a dynamic and interesting time. And this trend we're seeing, and obviously we've called it in the title, this concept of the turnover tsunami that we're seeing right now, is something that I'm having conversations with people about every single day. I think whether you call it the turnover tsunami or the great resignation is another term that I think's being used at the moment. We believe, and I'm going to talk about today, at the early stages of what we would anticipate to be quite a significant spike in job switching and attrition, along with some real challenges in identifying and attracting new employees. And obviously, it's become headline news in some areas. HGV drivers being the prime example. It's an industry that has lost some of its people over the past few years and is struggling to attract quickly enough and train quickly enough, which is clearly beginning to have a significant impact on all of us. So today's session is going to try and explore what's happening. So what is this turnover tsunami, this great resignation? How do we know what's leading us to to believe that this is something that we should care about, and critically, what can we do about it? And when we talk about what can we do about it, we're going to explore two areas in particular that are very close to our hearts here at Clear Review. That's modern and continuous performance management and employee engagement. And we're going to, my aim today, my hope for today, my objective for today is to leave you with some food for thought about what we believe are four things that you could do in the relative short term that could help mitigate some of what we believe might be coming downstream. Now, just before we go too much further, just a little bit of background for you. For those of you who have not come across us before, Clear Review are a best in practice continuous performance management software provider. We provide a completely online software as a service tool that helps transform organizations' approach to performance management. Now, today's not a sales pitch, I promise, but you'll get a feel for our ethos as we go along. But Clear Review is part of Advanced, which is one of the UK's largest software companies, more than 20,000 customers, predominantly in the UK, and now represents part of a full suite of complete end-to-end HCM software products, helping organizations manage all aspects of the talent lifecycle. And this is important because what it means is that we spend a lot of time every single day talking to businesses, talking to HR directors and HR leaders every single day about the issues and the challenges that they're grappling with right now. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is based either on some original research that we've done recently and on those day-to-day conversations. Now, I thought it'd be useful, and hopefully, I think as Sophie's called out, this is new technology. So hopefully you will have noticed by now that we've had a poll open from the beginning of this webcast. And in particular, I thought it would be interesting if you joined me for a webinar before, you know that I like a bit of audience participation. It saves me from staring into a screen and hoping that people are still listening. And I thought that given that we're talking about attrition, perhaps it would be interesting just to start by getting a pulse point. So there's a poll open, which hopefully you've spotted. If you haven't, I'm just going to hand over to Sophie for a second. We'll just run you through that poll and hopefully give me a quick readout of some of the findings of this little experiment.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So as you can see, the first poll has been live since the webinar started, and it is, how do you feel about employee turnover in your organisation at the moment? And so far, we've had quite an interesting split, I suppose, in terms of results. So at the moment, obviously, these can change as people continue to vote. But at the moment, the top answer with 39% is it is slightly higher than pre-pandemic. With 37%, it is much higher than pre-pandemic. And then on the other end of the scale, it is much lower than pre-pandemic with 5%. Is that something that you're perhaps expecting, Nick?
Yes, I think if I heard that correctly, Sophie, you're saying that the overwhelming majority of respondents are saying that employee turnover is higher. It's either higher or much higher. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, that's correct.
Absolutely not surprised whatsoever, frankly. And I'm going to dive into, I guess, some data points in a second. Again, for those of you who've been with me for webinars before, you'll know I like a graph or two, so I've been delighted to know I've got some coming. Although it's difficult to find good news in a world of high levels of employee turnover. The good news, I guess, for everybody on the session, and indeed everybody thinking about this issue, is that there you go. That's a real-time proof that you're not alone. But equally, you're not alone, and to be honest, it's probably not surprising, given some of the numbers that I'll share now. Now, just before I do, a little bit of background on what I'm going to share next. There's a couple of pieces of original research I'm going to reference. The first is available in the resources section on the screen now. The first is a piece of research done by the Clear Review team. And this is based around a survey of 1,000 employees who were forced to work from home during the pandemic. So they had historically worked in an office and then were forced to work from home. And it really explores, this fascinating piece of work, really explores how people are feeling and the expectations that people have moving into particularly the world of hybrid work. I'll share some of the findings, but not all of them. So there's some more interesting stuff in there. And the second is the 2021 Advanced Workforce Trend Survey report, which is an annual report that is published by Advanced, features or based around a survey of decision makers within UK businesses. So a kind of opposite end of the spectrum from employees to decision makers. And again, it's, explores some of the key themes and challenges facing organizations right now. And the really interesting thing about what's come out of these two pieces of research is that there are some really similar patterns, and similar patterns across the two, but also similar patterns to some of the other work that other people in the industry have been doing recently. And the first and probably headline observation that's come out of that I guess speaks to the data point that you guys on the call have just shared with me, is that right now, as many as 50% of people in our organizations are considering looking for a new role. Now, this is based largely on the work that the Clear Review team did, where we asked people directly, to what extent are you thinking about leaving? And 50% of us are out there right now thinking that perhaps now is the right time for us to go out there and have a look. Now, given the overwhelming majority of you are experiencing higher than normal attrition right now, that's probably not a surprise. It's also not a surprise because it backs up a number of other research findings on this topic. Probably the most interesting one comes from the Achievers Workforce Institute, who publish an annual engagement and retention report. I'll share a link to it in this slide, which is also available, I believe, for download from the site. Now, I don't represent Achievers in any way, shape or form, but they do a lot of interesting work, particularly in bringing workforce science and surfacing some really interesting numbers. This particular report that they publish is an annual report, so it's quite useful. And actually in their report, they found that 52% of people currently considering looking for a new role, based on a survey of 2,000 people that they did earlier on in the year. Now, critically, what's really important and what Achievers are able to tell us is they're able to benchmark that against what's normal. Because 50%, you might think, well, okay, that seems like quite a high number, but is that is that worse than normal? It turns out, yes, it is. Actually, it's 43% more people now looking for a new role compared to the same question set asked last year. So what we're seeing generally in the market is this sudden, significant increase in people considering their future, considering what might be next for them. And actually, when you break it down, and this is taken straight from the Achievers report, and you look at the different categorizations and the way that they categorize engagement for each individual, other than a slight uplift in those people who are feeling very engaged and planning to stay with their company for a long time, which has increased ever so slightly, every other indicator, every other definition of engagement, for every other category we're seeing falls in the level of employee engagement, which, again, probably shouldn't surprise you. It might do. Employee engagement is obviously a key leading indicator of attrition, and we know that job switching intent is increasing. But the fact that employee engagement is on the wane as well shouldn't escape our attention. In fact, when you dig into these numbers and you do the maths, which I'm not going to try and do live, but 71% of people are more disengaged right now compared to the same time last year. So probably not too surprising given what's going on. Now, given that those pieces of research that I've just mentioned, piece of work from Achievers, piece of work from Clear Review, piece of work from Advanced, were done earlier on this year, and calling out drops in engagement, increase in job switching attempt, it probably shouldn't be a huge surprise that that is starting to translate into hiring activity. But the scale of the hiring activity that's going on right now, I have to say, is not something I've seen in my career in the talent space before. This is a graph, and it doesn't look very pretty, but I do, like, as I said earlier, I do like a graph or two. This is a graph directly from the Office of National Statistics, and it's based on those surveys of employers that they send out. And as you can see, unsurprisingly, this is total vacancies right now. And as you can see, the kind of impact, the severe impacts of the pandemic and the sharp drop off in the line there on the one hand, we probably shouldn't be too surprised to see the sharp uplift the other side of that. But what is really interesting, I think, is that what this is calling out is that job vacancies are now at an all-time high, higher than at any point in the past 20 years, which I think is really interesting. So we've got this kind of already a signal that job switching intent and that attrition that is that we think might be in the system is already translating into vacancies across the market, not just in one particular area. And that's actually backed up by, and in fact, this is a slightly different data set that just looks at this through a slightly different lens. So this data set comes from the REC, who look at weekly new job postings and new jobs being created every week, as opposed to total number of jobs. And what they've found, unsurprisingly, there's been a trend upwards if we go back to the start of the pandemic. But what they found and are increasingly finding is that the rate of job creation, of new job posting, is continuing to increase week on week and month on month. So you've got not only a situation where we've got more job vacancies than we've had in the past 20 years, but actually the prevailing trend is still upwards. It does not look like we've got anywhere near the top of that particular spike yet. So we've got this indicator, we've got this backdrop, and it feels very strange to be stood here talking about, on the one hand, kind of stood here talking about retention, but we've got this very strange, potentially unprecedented backdrop of a great deal of job switching intent, a drop in employee engagement, which is starting to translate to hiring activity. And obviously some of that hiring activity will be driven by the recovering economy, but that lift and that continued growth calls out and suggests that there is something more at play here, and that job switching intent is beginning to be acted upon by people in our organisations. Now, this is, and obviously we've, given the title of the webinar today and the synopsis and the subject matter we're covering, this probably isn't a huge surprise. Hopefully you take some solace from the fact that this is happening countrywide. It's not confined just to one area. But the question really is, and the reason for talking today is, well, what can we do about it? This is potentially, as I said at the start, a trend that we are seeing that is growing. What can we actually physically in the short and medium term, what can we actually do within our organizations right now that might mitigate the outcome of that? And to start that, and there is a 4-point plan that I'm going to share with you shortly, but to start that and to help make that make sense, it's probably worthwhile going back to the concept of employee engagement and some of the data points I've pulled out earlier on. Now, one of the things I really like about the Achievers report, I recommend, thoroughly recommend you go and take a look at it, is whilst we're quite familiar with thinking about attrition and asking people, trying to uncover the reasons why people might want to leave an organisation, there's a focused set of questions in the Achievers approach which looks at why would you stay with your current organisation. This is a kind of direct excerpt from that report. Question, as you can see at the top, that was asked was, which of the following best describes why you would remain at your current employer, bearing in mind obviously the backdrop of we've got this increased level of job switching intent. And I think this is super interesting because taking aside compensation and corporate benefits, which for now I'm just going to take out. It's not necessarily something that's within our power to fix or influence right now. I think the fact that you've got work-life balance being called out as potentially the biggest reason why you might stay at your current employer, recognition being called out as the second biggest, and then a great working relationship with my manager being called out as the third biggest. And actually, quite significantly, those three are the biggest areas that are being called out. I think is quite fascinating, and for me, is the clue, if you like, to the starting point. So what can we do how can we influence this spike in attrition that's potentially coming our way. Now, work-life balance is an interesting one because it also features quite heavily in the advanced report that I mentioned earlier. And in particular, the advanced report calls out a degree of nervousness or a degree of worry that people have about losing the perceived improvement in work-life balance that they've perhaps benefited from in some way, shape, or form as one of the benefits of the switch to remote working. And it turns out, as you can see on the slide, that when thinking about a return to the office, 47% of us are worried about maintaining work-life balance, which is interesting. And actually, that's double the amount of, or the percentage of us who are worried about losing a job or keeping a job. I think that's a really interesting thing. Actually, if you just say it a different way round, if you turn that sentence around, we are half as worried about losing jobs right now than we might be about than we are about losing the flexibility that some of us have gained, which I think is really interesting. So we talk about, work-life balance is a critical factor in engagement. We've got this big engagement drop. Engagement is a kind of leading indicator to attrition, and we can already see this spike in attrition happening. And I think that's kind of interesting. Now, at the same time, the advanced report also calls out, and I haven't got a slide for this, also calls out that despite the fact that 47% of us are concerned about losing or change to work-life balance, actually only around a third of us felt that working from home during the pandemic has had a positive impact on our mental health. So if we just pause for a moment, because I know I've just thrown loads of numbers out there, so just pause for a moment and reflect on it. So about 70% of us are less engaged than we were pre-pandemic. About 50% of us are considering changing jobs. And at the same time, 47% of us are worried that we're going to lose work-life balance. Albeit, just to complicate that picture, quite a few of us believe that the kind of forced new normal has actually been very good for us. This paints, I think, a really interesting and unique picture, but really, I think forms a starting point for what can we do about this attrition spike, this turnover tsunami, and in particular, what's the role of performance management? And it leads us in, I think, quite nicely into the clear review recommendations, if you like, for what do we believe that right now an organisation could do through shining a light, in particular on performance management and performance management process. What do we believe organisations could do? And these are the four things. The first is to double down on engagement by really trying to focus on understanding the pulse of the organisation. Now, there is for those of you who know Clear Review, you'll know how closely intertwined we believe performance management and engagement are. And I'm going to take a little bit of time in a moment just to walk you through the Clear Review approach to employee engagement and how it sits and fits within the performance management lifecycle. The second thing we think you could do, and it's very closely related to the first, is to invest. Now could be the time to invest, the perfect time, I should say, to invest in tools which enable you to understand what is happening in the organisation, and in particular, what is happening both on the ground in terms of engagement, but also on the ground in terms of the work that your people are doing, how they're feeling. The third thing that we think that features on the Clear Review, how to kind of mitigate the incoming turnover tsunami, is to focus your hybrid approach on enabling flexibility and enabling work-life balance. I think there's an opportunity to directly run at work-life balance in hybrid policy. And the fourth is around feedback. Now, feedback is important. I haven't mentioned this, but if you cast your mind back a couple of slides to the reasons why people would stay with a company, you remember the role of recognition. So recognition was second in that list, just behind work-life balance. The reality around recognition is quite interesting. So 80% of us believe that recognition makes a company more attractive to work for, but only 40% of us believe we get enough recognition. So there's a really clear gap in terms of recognition that is potentially quite quite simple to fix in the short term or to plug. So this is the set of recommendations. I'm going to spend a bit of time diving into each one, in particular into the first three. I'm going to take you on an interesting whistle-stop tour through engagement and a kind of modern performance management principles, and how they could potentially impact some of these areas. Before I do, I think hopefully we've updated the poll because I thought it would be useful to take perhaps another temperature check, understand, break up me throwing loads of numbers at you, and ask some questions about engagement. So, Sophie, I'm going to hand back over to you again.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks everyone for participating in the second poll as well. So the question was, how do you feel about engagement in your organisation at the moment? And the one which seems to be coming out on top with 61% is, I think engagement is about the same as it was pre-pandemic. Sorry, excuse me. I think our people are less engaged than they have been historically was the top answer. With 26%, I think engagement is about the same as it was pre-pandemic, with 4% saying, I don't know. So effectively, the top answer currently is that people are less engaged than they have been historically. Is that something that you're expecting, Nick?
And we were talking about, if you remember, the 4-point set of recommendations for what can we as HR practitioners do to really impact retention. And I kind of gave you a warning, an indication that we were going to focus on engagement and on performance management. Now, we got as far as saying that, one of the challenges generally with employee engagement, and thinking, isn't it easy to stand here and say, well, we've got an engagement problem, so we need to focus on engagement. One of the challenges that we've got is that employee engagement has simply stayed stagnant. And I was just sharing before we encountered those audio issues. A big piece of work done by Aon in 2018 showed this stagnation pretty starkly. So engagement moved down a couple of percent in the UK in 2018, was pretty flat in the US, and went up a couple of percent in mainland Europe. But it was off a very low baseline, to be honest. And another big worldwide survey of engagement done by Gallup puts worldwide engagement at around 35%. So it's a pretty low baseline. And we're struggling to do much about it, which is a huge shame, because we do know that engagement is a huge performance differentiator. We know that companies with engaged employees outperform those without by up to 200%. Big piece of work done by Dale Carnegie University. We also know that so-called purist engagement surveys aren't really solving the problem, because there's plenty of work out there that suggests and shows that as many as 58% of companies take no meaningful action from those surveys in any case, which is, again, a real shame, because it means that our senior leadership simply aren't benefiting the way that they could. And we know that a piece of work in the Harvard Business Review calls out that a 5% increase in employee engagement and motivation leads to a 3% increase in revenue. So we've got an interesting kind of backdrop here that, we've got essentially what's happening right now. The turnover tsunami is essentially coming from, or stemming from, challenges around engagement. But what we do with engagement and how we think about engagement, certainly historically, perhaps hasn't helped us do what we'd like it to do. So what's the issue? Why? Well, there's a few reasons for that. Fundamentally, the two key ones, if we're going to categorize them: number one, we're not measuring it in the right way. So we're not necessarily, when we think about engagement, we're not asking the right questions, and we almost certainly don't use the right cadence or frequency. So we tend to do in inverted commas engagement annually. And if you think about what's going on at the moment, and the complicated, complex mix of talent demands and feelings across organizations, annual is probably not quickly enough. And we're also not taking the right steps to fix the problem. We tend to tinker at the edges of experience, and we don't focus on the two key issues. Now, here at Clear Review, we spent a lot of time thinking about engagement. And in particular, we think about engagement against the backdrop of performance management, because performance management is obviously what we do. We're interested in helping organizations perform better. Now, part of that comes from helping individuals in organizations perform better. But part of that also focuses on how do we create such an exciting environment at work that it impacts propensity to leave. Now, to do all of this, we enlisted the help of, to do all of the things I'm about to share with you. We enlisted the help of a world-renowned workforce psychologist, a chap called Ian McRae. I've got a slide that will tell you a little bit more about Ian in a second. But he helped us build our own model of engagement. And my key takeaway from today's session, for those of you, is when I say now is a good time to double down on engagement, what I'm not saying is now is a good time to go back to the current ways that we're thinking and approaching the engagement issue. My big takeaway is that now's the perfect time for us to rethink or relook at engagement, and in particular, how it links to and drives performance. Now, there are lots of different ways of looking at engagement. The Clear Review preferred methodology, and the methodology that sits at the heart of our performance model is the concept of work engagement. Now, as with everything we do at Clear Review, everything that we do is based on workforce psychology. It's rooted in the science. Now, work engagement is a particularly interesting concept. And for those of you who've never come across it before, there's a nice definition up on the screen. Work engagement is a positive, fulfilling, work-related state of mind which reflects an active state of occupational well-being. For those of you in the audience who are into your running, you might have come across the concept of flow before. So flow is effectively when you're out running and the world kind of stops and everything feels absolutely perfect in the moment. It's a very similar concept of flow. It's everything at work is working well, you're enjoying work, feeling full of energy, you're deeply immersed in work. And this is a well-established scientific concept, the idea of work engagement, and it's been studied extensively. And there is even a very well-established scientifically backed way to measure it, and that is known as the Utrecht work engagement scale, which is a measurement technique that's based on a couple of decades of research into well-being and performance. The challenge with it, it's based around a questionnaire, but the challenge with it is it's a bit too long and a bit too challenging to measure regularly. Now, you might think that's a bit left of center. Work engagement is an interesting concept, but the other really interesting thing about work engagement is its level of predictability. So if you think about all of the different things that predict performance, bearing in mind we're a performance management company and performance is what we do, all of the many things that could predict whether someone's going to perform at work, and by the way, all of the things that predict whether someone's going to perform at work also predict whether someone's likely to attrit at work. All of the things like, for example, intellect, personality, skills, experience, the way somebody is led. Actually, of all of those things, it is work engagement that is the best predictor of whether somebody will be successful in the tasks that they're asked to do at work, i.e. work engagement predicts performance. Now, at Clear Review, we've built a model. We believe work engagement is kind of super important for both performance and retention. And we built a model that enables us to measure work engagement in a really simple way. I promised you a little bit more information on Ian McRae, who's our partner in crime when it comes to engagement. And we built a model which basically enables an organization to measure three factors which drive work engagement, and we call them energy, purpose, and immersion. Energy is the extent with which somebody is energized at work, very straightforward. Purpose is the extent to which somebody feels purposefully attached to their work, and immersion is the level to which time passes quickly when someone is working. And we've developed a tool. I won't dive too deeply into it, but we've developed a tool which enables us to measure these three concepts in real time and enables us and our customers to understand and interpret what is happening in real time based on the movements in these measures. So, for example, when an organization's average level of energy drops, or perhaps a particular part of the organization and the people working in a particular part of the organization experience a sudden energy drop, we know what that means and how to take action. Now, the point of sharing this with you is not necessarily to get you all to go out and research the concept of work engagement, but I go back to where we are now, which is we're living in times with high existing and potential retention and high levels of engagement challenges, and an encouragement and a piece of advice to go and look again at the way in which you're measuring engagement, and perhaps thinking about what kind of tools could we invest in which might enable us to understand what is really happening front and center in the organization right now. And there are plenty of other models out there which can help you achieve the same thing. It's just a good time to think about how are we measuring how people are feeling in our business, and how can we significantly lift up what we're doing around employee engagement right now to really understand what is happening. And obviously, if you want to talk any further around the concept of work engagement, let us know. Now, the other thing that's going on at the moment, if you think about our 3-point scale for ways in which we can potentially mitigate the turnover tsunami, we talked about doubling down on engagement, and we talked about investing in tools which help you understand what's going on. The third thing we talked about was hybrid working. Was work-life balance. Now, what's going on with work-life balance? What's happening with work-life balance right now? Well, fundamentally, what's happening and what's changing is hybrid, obviously, and I'm sure by now we've all had enough of talking about hybrid working. But fundamentally, hybrid working is a huge disruption to the way that we think about the very nature of how we think about and organize work. Now, one of the big challenges around this concept of work-life balance is concept of hybrid working. And if you think back to some of the numbers that we shared earlier on, that 23% of us actually say, you know what, if we could have a better work-life balance, we would feel far more engaged to our organization. And if we think about the 47% of us who are concerned about work-life balance, that's a really interesting, or it feels like there's a really interesting opportunity that potentially comes to us with hybrid working. Now, one of the things that makes this very difficult, though, and I've shared this on previous webinars for those of you who've had the experience before, but one of the really interesting things is when you look at work-life balance, and when you look at, in particular, the market's desire for time spent in the office and time spent at home, it's very difficult to spot a pattern which would apply to all. So this is a chart taken from one of the pieces of research I mentioned earlier on. One of the questions we asked as part of that clear review piece of research was, moving forwards, how much of your time would you like to spend in the office? And remember, this was 1,000 people who had been forced to work from home during the pandemic. And what we found was super interesting on many levels. Firstly, we found that only 6% of people would like to go back to the office full time. So if you are thinking about bringing all of your employees back full time, either now or in the near term future, bear in mind when you do so that 94% of your people might feel that might further disengage 96% of your people. And it's probably quite a risky thing to consider doing. Opposite end of the spectrum, nearly 20% of people are saying they don't want to come back at all. But equally interestingly, there is absolutely no consensus amongst the rest of us as to what is the ideal balance between home work and office working. So if you think about that work-life balance and some of the principles and concepts that come from that, well, actually, if we're trying to design a hybrid policy to support work-life balance, that's really difficult, because clearly work-life balance means something very different for all of us. Now, when it comes to so what do we do with this? Well, our advice is really clear on this, and our hybrid working principle is really clear on this. We believe that the way to really build and harness and build upon the work-life balance gains that people have had, and the things that they're obviously concerned about losing right now, is to build a hybrid working policy that is based around the concept of empowering people to perform work wherever and whenever best suits the task. Just to give you an example of what we're talking about with this, this is what we're talking about here is, rather than saying to your organization, you need to work to kind of in the office on a Monday and a Tuesday, or kind of Thursday and a Friday, and you can be at home on the other days. or another kind of version of that. The best thing to do is to explain and make it really clearly articulated to your people that what is important is the outcome, and then empower people to make the choice for themselves. Best example probably comes from, if you think about onboarding. This is my favorite example. I think those of us particularly those of us in the talent management space would agree that we've learned it's absolutely possible to onboard somebody remotely. But equally, we would probably all agree that the whole onboarding experience is much more immersive, and we get a much better outcome when we do that in person, face to face. And by empowering people involved in that process to perform work wherever and whenever best suits the task, we will get a better outcome. This is the clear review belief when it comes to how to make the best of hybrid working. And if you think about making this work successfully and the impact that would have on work-life balance, I think it's significant. Now, the reason that many of us are not doing this, and I go back to the fact that we talk to HR directors every single day, is because it's really difficult, right? It's really difficult, and doing it really does require very, very good performance management. So really making the best of building an environment in which we're all empowered. Doesn't matter whether we're in the office, doesn't matter whether we're at home, we're empowered to take control of our work-life balance, comes from a modern performance management approach. And there are really three things that sit at the heart of that, three things that I think are really super important. The first is the concept of agile goals that are aligned to business priorities. People can only be empowered to do the task in the way that suits the best outcome if they know what the really important work they should be doing right now is. So I always ask people I'm talking to think quite deeply. To what extent do you believe that right now all of your people really know what is the important work that they should be prioritizing right now? If you can't do that, thinking about this empowering hybrid approach is kind of quite difficult. The second thing is fundamentally, if you're going to make that approach to hybrid work, is the concept of meaningful conversations. And critically, that those meaningful conversations take place between managers and employees. Those meaningful conversations need to be focused on very honest dialogue around progress against goals, around blockers, issues, concerns. They need to be focused on making sure that everybody understands where you are against those agile goals and are invested and committed in making progress. And the third thing you'll need, part of that modern performance management framework, is the concept of real-time feedback. And real-time feedback is really, really super important to keeping motivation high, as I'll explain in a moment. But feedback's got to be honest, actionable, and given in the moment. So, third point on the how to mitigate the great turnover tsunami for you is to think quite deeply about hybrid and about this concept of empowering. In doing so, perhaps it's time again to take a step back and have a look at your performance management process and say, to what extent are we able to deliver real clarity on what's important to our people, and to what extent are we seeing really good quality conversations happening across the organizations, and to what extent do people know how they're getting on? All three of these factors are critical to performance. Now, finally, we also talked about recognition. I'm conscious of time, and I know I've had some challenges with tech, so I'm not going to talk too much about feedback given that I just had. But if you cast your mind back to those reasons why people will consider staying with us right now, and how high recognition featured in that, feedback in and of itself of everything that's involved in the modern performance management kind of life cycle, feedback in and of itself is perhaps the most powerful and easiest to implement game changer that you could think about, because feedback, we know, has a significant multiplying effect on motivation, as long as it's meaningful, clear, specific, and provides the recipient with an understanding of the outcome of the work that they did, and preferably if it's in writing. We know how important feedback is. So it's a really interesting area, potentially powerful area to spend some time thinking about. So to summarize, we've got this big, challenging attrition retention challenge coming down the line, and I think the polls we've done today have shown that is definitely something we should be worried about. That's underpinned and explained to a certain extent by engagement challenges. We think there are 4 things that you can do. Double down on engagement, really focus on understanding what's going on in the organization right now. So think differently about engagement and about the tools that you invest in, which enable you to understand what's happening in the organization. We think focusing on hybrid and really enabling flexibility and empowerment is important. And to do that, you'll need to take another look at performance management principles and how you're approaching performance management. And lastly, feedback is fundamentally important to achieving recognition for your people. I appreciate we've had a limited amount of time today, and we've kind of exacerbated that through the technical issues we've had. If you're interested in any of these topics, talking about them any further, I'll just point you to a free resource that we have at academy.clearreview.com. It's completely free. It is a really useful resource full of a range of different courses that explore some of what I've just talked about in a lot more detail. There's a course up there on performance management and continuous performance management. There's pieces around changing performance culture, feedback, how to measure performance, all sorts of other kind of interesting and useful resources up there. So feel free to take a look. And all that's left for me to say is thank you very much for coming along today, and pass back to Sophie. I've got a couple of minutes in case we've had any interesting questions come in.
Yes, thanks, Nick. And thanks for a really insightful presentation. Just got time, as you say, for a couple of quick questions now. So the first one really is, we understand that engagement is key to retention. Do you perhaps have any tips or tricks to promote conversations between employees and managers?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it sounds very straightforward. Particularly when we talk, when we talk about managers, encouraging conversations feels like a very simple, basic part of the management life cycle. But what we often hear when we dive into this is that managers feel they don't have enough time. They've got pressures of other things that they're trying to do at the same time. So it's difficult for them to kind of prioritize these kind of conversations. So probably the biggest tip or trick that we've got and we extol is it really helps to explain to the manager the value of good quality conversations to them. There's a framework that we've developed that really encourages managers to understand what the world would look like if everybody in their team could perform 10% better. How much better would your own workload feel if that was the case? And generally speaking, most managers are pretty keen to live in a world where their people perform better. So then being able to articulate and explain the role of conversations just in enabling performance, and they're such a significant enabler of performance, generally helps when we think about conversations.
Okay, perfect. And I think the second one relates to something you were talking about earlier. The person's written in saying, we've started to see a spike in attrition. Do you have any advice on how to combat that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's something we've talked about, pretty extensively. I think those kind of 4 points that we shared earlier are a good starting point. I genuinely think that outside of that, the most important thing you can try to understand is what is happening in the organization right now. So, again, it feels a little bit like we're talking about retention. It feels like going right back to the start of my career where we spent a lot of time talking about retention. But, if perhaps now is not the right time to look at broader engagement, then now is definitely a good time to double down on things like exit interviews and feedback from people who have left to really try to understand what's going on. And I guess engaging with senior leadership to try to help them understand that the attrition that we're seeing right now isn't the end of the attrition, and there is this wider set of pressures that the workforce is kind of exposed to. That normally helps them understand and focus minds on listening to some of the feedback that we can generate, whether that's through pulse engagement tools or through things like exit interview data and feedback.
Okay, well, thank you, Nick, for answering those questions, and thank you everyone for sending in your questions as well. Just to reiterate, thank you all for bearing with us today throughout the technical complications. But thank you again to Nick and Clear Review for sharing your insights with us today. A recording will also be made available afterwards if you want to look back through some of the notes and talking points from today. And as ever, if you have any questions, please do endeavour to get in touch with Clear Review directly. I wish you all a fantastic rest of the day, and we look forward to welcome you back to additional webinars.